Welcome to the ISF podcast from the Information Security Forum, featuring timely conversations, practical insights, and resources for global cybersecurity professionals. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert. Today we have the second in a 4-episode series focusing on the ISF's latest report, Threat Horizon 2024, The Disintegration of Trust. Today, we delve into the first major theme of the report: well-intentioned regulations have unintended consequences. Are you telling us that we're on the road to legislative hell, paved with all those good intentions? Is that the report?
Something like that, yeah. What we're saying is that efforts by governments, regulators, and other official bodies to mitigate pressing cyber threats and assert control over the ways in which some emerging technological and financial innovations are used will give rise to many new policies and regulations. As these different legislative changes take hold, it will become apparent that they're not removing dangers, but are forcing evolutions that risk redirecting the threats, as well as burdening organisations with a raft of hard-to-meet demands that actually still leave them open to attack, disruption and harm.
It reminds me of way back 4 or 5 years ago when we talked all the time about GDPR. And you'd always remind me in those episodes that compliance does not equal security.
Yeah, I think that's always important for organisations to keep in mind, even with the best legislation.
So the first prediction the report makes is that ransomware will evolve into triple extortion, which does not sound good to me.
Yeah, ongoing and far-reaching political, diplomatic and legal action against ransomware gangs and the underground financial systems that support them may do more harm than good. Ransomware gangs will initially suffer some inconvenience, then adapt to new restrictions by broadcasting the fruits of attacks more widely, and including customers of victims and other stakeholders in ransom demands.
So what do organizations do to prepare for that sort of situation?
Well, organizations that don't regularly evaluate their ability to detect and respond to extortion attacks such as ransomware should now consider a strategic approach to managing such an enduring threat to their business. A re-evaluation of what business-critical data assets exist in the organization and where they reside will further support this particular objective. For now, though, there are a few really specific and concrete steps. Businesses should ensure the subject of extortion and ransomware threat has been socialized with the board. The board should have an understanding of this ongoing threat so that it's not a surprise if and when it happens. And now is also a good time to understand your level of cyber hygiene versus the threat and understand and risk assess any gaps. Companies should also be reviewing existing organizational cyber incident and crisis response protocols and complete simulation exercises to test their efficacy. And finally, they need to identify data sources most likely to be hit by targeted extortion attacks, such as mission-critical data assets, intellectual property, and so on.
So we're back to the basic ISF tenet of protecting the crown jewels.
Exactly right. And then, of course, in the longer term, we're recommending that businesses prepare, implement, and actively maintain an organizational playbook for responding to extortion attacks. They should also be reviewing the resilience of the organization's supply chain in the context of an organization's inherent ransomware risk. And finally, we recommend that they revisit security architecture to ensure appropriate network segmentation to protect mission-critical data assets, such as considering a strategy of zero trust. So again, back to strategizing to protect the crown jewels.
The second point the report makes is that regulators will inhibit data-driven innovation. And I guess that's not exactly a shocking prediction, but it's going to create a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think so. Organizations keen to reap the rewards of creating and using AI-based algorithms to run their business are forced to delay as regulators demand that these tools be approved for use before they're deployed. Organizations risk being stuck in a developmental spiral as they make sure algorithms don't fall foul of ambiguous legal demands, that they operate fairly. Handling the complicated set of tasks related to data-driven business will be a responsibility for not just one but many functions within an organization. And information security practitioners should actively participate in this work, or at the very least act as advisors and guides. So for right now, in the short term, we're suggesting that organizations should look at discovering which algorithms are in use across the organization and the manner in which they were developed. They should also be looking to find ways to assure the integrity of the data sources that those algorithms use. We also recommend that they review their regulatory landscape to determine which laws and regulations apply to algorithms, as well as review their internal governance structures and policies to understand if they're adequately covering algorithms.
So knowing what they're using and what's being regulated right now will really help organizations go forward. What about thinking farther down the road than that?
Well, they'll need to understand, or perhaps in some cases develop, the organization's strategy for the use of algorithms. We're also recommending that they develop a plan to improve governance of algorithms, for example via policies, and that they create a process to measure outcomes and expose potential bias on an ongoing basis. And finally, an important piece of this will be to reach out and engage with regulators to find out how rules are changing and really have their ear to the ground on that.
That makes sense. I remember when you spoke with Alexander Sager of the European Commission, for example, he really encouraged our listeners to get in touch with him personally and develop that relationship. And I imagine many regulators would have that attitude. So if you have questions or you read about a piece of legislation coming up, you have someone that you can literally call to find out more and make changes if necessary to ensure you're in compliance.
Exactly, yeah.
The final prediction from the report we'll be talking about today is that attackers undermine central cryptocurrencies. So does this mean that Bitcoin may not be that amazing investment that we'd all hoped so much it would be?
Well, I don't think I'm going to get into that here, but cyber thieves are certainly going to seek to cash in on central bank crypto cash schemes that let consumers and organizations buy and sell goods and services with these virtual currencies. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, organizations engaging with these central systems and with existing established private crypto networks will struggle to comply with a raft of regulations that were not drafted in concert. The gradual adoption of digital cash will undoubtedly test the security arrangements of many organizations as they seek to accommodate the different schemes and cash types. Implementing controls around the processing of payments is a first step in avoiding costly mistakes.
So in the short term, what should organizations do to protect themselves here?
Well, the report makes a few recommendations. First, recognizing that crypto is still quite new and complex, companies need to identify or perhaps recruit subject matter experts in cryptocurrencies and assess the organization's readiness for securely adopting cryptocurrencies. They should also reach out to central bank experts for guidance. We also suggest that organizations audit their existing financial systems to expose weak points and gauge operational readiness for cryptocurrency commerce. And then finally, they need to make sure security operations are familiar with proposed changes.
What about looking farther ahead?
Well, longer term, organizations can advise on the creation of a testbed for cryptocurrency transactions. They also need to be talking to regulators, said that a few times now, about the effect of increased crypto trading on existing anti-money laundering and know your customer regulations, because that's a huge area of necessary focus. They need to harden their payment platforms against denial of service and subversion attacks. It's also important. And we also recommend that they draw up and rehearse incident response plans to handle cryptocurrency.
So what I'm taking away from this is that avoiding some of the unintended consequences of well-intended regulations has to do with security pros being aware of both their own systems and current and upcoming regulations. And it sounds to me like you're telling people that the way forward is to start making connections and building real relationships with regulators, with experts in things like cryptocurrencies, with their own supply chain, with others in their industry, so that a leader is aware and prepared for what's coming. I feel like we don't often talk about the security team being outward-facing in that way, so this is a new perspective.
It is, and the title of the threat horizon is the Disintegration of Trust, and frankly the way to combat that is to build better, stronger, deeper relationships.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think it's what we need across many problems in our world today. So, Steve, thanks as always for your time and your expertise. Listeners, you can find the Threat Horizon Report 2024, The Disintegration of Trust, at securityforum.org. We'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. And that's also where you can go to find links to some of the other reports and episodes we mentioned in today's discussion, including Protecting the Crown Jewels and our recent podcast featuring Alexander Sager, the head of the Cybercrime Division for the Council of Europe. You can always go back and listen to the Threat Horizon reports from previous years here on our podcast. You'll find those in our feed, and we'll link them in the show notes as well. Next week, Steve and I discuss the second major theme of the Threat Horizon Report 2024, Technology Choices Diminish Control. We'll be back for the full conversation in a week. In the meantime, is there a topic or a question that you'd like us to cover in a future episode? Let us know at securityforum.org, which is where you can always find our catalog of past video and podcast episodes, as well as ISF's research, practical tools, and guidance related to discussions like today's. Find us on LinkedIn by searching CEO Steve Durbin or Security Forum. Follow our audio feed wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll never miss an episode. And if you like the ISF podcast, we'd love it if you'd write a short review. The ISF podcast is produced by Talkbox and Tavia Gilbert, with music by Alexander Filipiak. Senior producer Katie Flood. Mix and master by Brian Barney. Thanks for listening.